Welcome, all and everyone, and all people visiting in the stream. Welcome. This is the 17th season of NTNU Evening. And tonight we ask, vanishing nature, what are the consequences and how can we stop the loss? The world experiences a destruction of nature and a loss of species that we have never seen in human history. Norway is no exception. More than 2,700 species, among them 40% of breeding birds, are in risk of disappearing from Norwegian nature. The main cause behind these dramatic losses is an extensive destruction of Norwegian nature that no one has a proper overview of all. Well documented in the NRK series of the TV and articles. This means that we do not know what we are losing, how much we are losing, and what this means for the species that lives here. And among them is also the human beings that critically is dependent on nature's contributions. NTNU started in 2021 a project which is called SUS-RES NTNU program, at NTNU program. And SUS-RES, it's short for Sustainable Research, and this is the largest sustainability research initiative in a university in Norway today. This is nearly 50 PhD candidates and postdoc candidates. The program aims at better systems understanding related to transformative changes for sustainability. All the projects have an interdisciplinary orientation and address the transformative changes needed to achieve a sustainable society. Tonight, you will have the privilege to listen to scientists from one of 11 of these projects, Sustainable Land Use Project, which is one of the 11 projects in the SUS-RES program. And this is in the core of NTNU's vision, which is knowledge for a better world. But first, I will introduce Anders Finstad, who is professor in Biodiversity at the Department of Natural History in the University Museum. He was during many years member of the leader group of NTNU Sustainability. His special responsibility was biodiversity and ecosystem services, and he's also part of the new Vjærevoll Center at NTNU. Please, Anders, the stage is yours.
I was tasked to give a brief introduction, to present sort of the big picture. However, I think it's equally interesting to provide the long picture of this. So, we do indeed live in interesting times. Currently, we are facing the largest mass extinction of biodiversity this planet has seen for 66 million years. Now, this is in scientific circles known with a long, fancy Greek name, or for short, the CP mass extinction, but is more commonly known as the end of the dinosaurs. Well, this mass extinction was caused by an external object. It's generally believed today that it was a big rock, an asteroid colliding with Earth, and yes, the rest is history. So it did eradicate the dinosaurs. That's a common belief. I mean, dinosaurs are flying around with us today. They have feathers. It eradicated all non-avian dinosaurs. And it also eradicated a whole bunch of other species across the animal and plant taxa with them. Now, what happened then is that this created enormous empty niche spaces. So other organisms could thrive, evolve, and it had a massive impact on the evolution of life on Earth. And one of those organisms that did thrive and did survive and did multiply and evolve was mammals. So here we stand, 66 million years later, and we are facing a new mass extinction. And the irony of it is that this mass extinction is caused by the very same species that the previous mass extinction helped bring forward. Well, the impact humans or this species, Homo sapiens, has on the planet is so massive at the moment that we are currently seeing this as a new geological epoch called the Anthropocene. So, viewed in light of this time span, which we don't measure in decades or in centuries, but in millions of years, our actions might seem insignificant. However, come to think about it, we are not really only shaping the future of our children, our grandchildren, our grandchildren, children's. We are shaping the future of the evolution of life on Earth right now for the previous millions and millions of years to come. So, lots of biodiversity. Lots of biodiversity is not the only thing going around nowadays, is it? You have all heard about climate change, right? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So, humanity is currently causing multiple environmental crises at once. And often we coin them the nature crisis and the climate crisis for short, and they are certainly interlinked. Because some of the problems, some of the causes, and also some of the solutions might be similar for these crises. Yes. So, for example, you might have situations where you can restore habitats that are rich in very rare or threatened biodiversity, and at the same time also stores and captures a lot of greenhouse gases, for example, mires. You might, by nature-based solutions, create or restore habitats that are good for biodiversity, good for the climate, etc., etc. So, all very good. However, there are also very much real and direct conflicts among solutions to these two crises. For example, a very sort of common example today is renewable energy. There's a huge perceived need for new energy sources right today. We have to do an energy transition where we move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and this involves, at some point, destruction of nature. Also, not a quite coincident or random example, the so-called green shift or green transformation, as an industrial term, requires a lot of new minerals, and we can't find those minerals in deep sea habitats with a lot of threatened biodiversity. So we do have all these different trade-offs and different questions that we need to ask and need to find solutions of. Or, in other words, things are complicated. And it's these complexities that makes us at NTNU busy. That's why we're here. So, while we can agree in some respect that we have enough knowledge to act on some questions. I think that's easy. I think it's also equally easy to say that we have questions that are so complex that we need more knowledge. So how to solve the biodiversity crisis without, and at the same time, the climate crisis? Which nature should we destroy? Which nature do we need to preserve? This is important questions, and it does not only require knowledge on biodiversity. It requires knowledge also on societal aspects, economic aspects, on technology. And these complex questions, they require that we, as scientists, collaborate across disciplines. It requires that we train our young scientists to collaborate and to work across disciplines. And exactly that is what this project, Nature-Based Solution for Land Use Transition to More Sustainable Societies, is doing. This is why this research is so important. And I'm looking really forward, together with you here, to see what we are presented tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders Finstad. Ivar Herfindal is researcher at NTNU's Gjærevoll Center for Biodiversity Foresight Analysis. He is project manager of the Sustainable Land Use Project. In his research, he is particularly interested in the huge variation that we observed in the biodiversity between areas even close to each other and over time. The main aim is to understand what causes these variations and how individuals, species, and biodiversity are affected by natural and human-caused environmental changes, such as climate and land use change. To investigate this, a system for monitoring several species groups in the different nature types and over several years is established. And this is named Ecosystem Trøndelag. Please, Ivar, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Randi, and thank you all for coming here. It's really nice to see so many people. And thank you to NTNU Kveld for organizing this great event for us. So I will also go a bit back in time, not 60 million years, but in 1987, our then Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland, she led a commission and they published a report called Our Common Future. I guess many of you remember this. This was one of the first time that they really emphasized that biodiversity and ecosystems are important for us people, not only single species or beautiful landscapes. This was followed up in 1992 by the Convention of Biological Diversity, ratified in Rio de Janeiro by UN countries. And it really put Norway in the forefront of environmental conservation. I myself was really proud that Norway had a leading role for nature conservation at that time. About the same time, this map was created. I also remember this very good because I was a student. I was studying the methodology, the techniques that was used to create that map. And this was state-of-the-art technology at that time. And also, it represented a really, really clear eye-opener about what is going on in Norway. This shows how we are losing nature from 1900 and until 1992 in a dramatic speed. And I think that even with today's fancy visualization tools, it cannot be made any more clear than this. You need a map with two colors to tell the message. And the Norwegian Environment Agency agreed with me, not that I told them so, but they found out themselves, and continued to make this map. Here are a new map from 1988, and then the most recent map from 2018, and I guess they will release a new map for 2023 anytime now. It seems that we sort of have stopped the loss. It's not so much left, but we are losing nature, at least this wilderness nature, as this map shows, at a quite high rate. So let me illustrate this. This is the building where we are now, at least we are physical here. It's Dokkhuset. And if this was a wilderness area, from the time I entered the stage and until now, half of Dokkhuset has been gone. That is the bar and all you on the back until the sound table. And then this row goes, and then you over there are gone. That's the speed of destruction of wilderness area today. And when I'm finished, all of Dokkhuset is gone. And by tomorrow, there is no Solsiden left. That's the speed that we are destroying wilderness area in Norway every minute, every hour, from 1988 until 2018, and it is continuing at a speed that we don't yet know what will happen the next years. So what is happening? Let's take a look into Finnmark. That's the area in Norway with some of the most wilderness area left. If we zoom in, it looks like this. This is the more green, the more intact nature far away from human infrastructure you have. It looks quite okay. We can really envy Finnmark about this situation. So what are we doing with this area? So now I put on the planned and the already established wind power plant in Finnmark that has been established after 2018. And almost exclusively, they are placed on the dark green areas, those few remaining wilderness areas that we have in Norway. That's where we put these wind power plants. But Norway is not only Norway has nature that is not only far away. Most of the nature in Norway is close to us, and then it's not defined as wilderness area, but it's still nature. So this is an area which has very little of these intact wild areas. Where we are perhaps a bit more familiar, it's the area around Berkåk. And from above, it looks like this. This is an aerial photo from 2015. It looks nice. You have a typical trøndersk kulturlandskap in the valley bottom, and then you have nature further away. Let's see how it looks like in 2023. It's this, you recognize the same, but there is this big scar through the landscape. So we have decided to do something there. And what we have decided to do is that we need a new road to pass Berkåk in 110. Someone cannot pass Berkåk fast enough, apparently. This is the crossing if you want to go to Berkåk instead of continuing to Dovre and Norway. So that's the decisions we make about Norwegian nature. And it may have taken some extreme examples here, but the main point here is that we don't go out destroying nature just for fun. There is some good intentions or not so good intentions. All these changes are justified in one way or another by someone. It can be better roads, it can be cabin, it can be new sports arena, it can be clean energy, more food, better food. All of these good intentions are just used to justify to destroy nature. And if we want to do something with how we treat our nature, we have to understand these good intentions. And that is not a task for ecologists like me. That is a task for someone who can understand people better. So fortunately, we are a multidisciplinary project. We have Tonje Sommerseth. Unfortunately, she couldn't come here today to present, but her task, her project is to try and understand how we are justifying different forms of land use based on values or based on ideas about what nature is and how important it is. So she will do this by looking into not this abrupt, rapid land use change that we are used to see at the NRK. So these people here, they are not digging for gold. They are planting what was thought to be the gold for coastal Norway, the Sitka spruce. And it's an old picture, as you can see. It shows how slow the land use can be sometimes. It's so slow that we don't notice it, that it happens. But at some point, the landscape has changed to something like this, dense forest. And with that change, also the ideas of the value of this species, how good it is, has changed, at least for some people. This is a really interesting process that both the landscape change, the nature change, but also what we consider good and what others consider is a pest is driving these changes. So if we should understand how we change our landscape, we have to understand how these values change. And that is an extremely important task that we are really happy that we have people working with. But nature, we have changed nature quite for some years. This is not new. What you have seen on NRK is just for the last few years, because that's when you had high-resolution satellites that could take the picture. But it's been going on from we stepped on Norway for the first time many thousand years ago. And not all changes are very apparent. And not all changes are bad, maybe. So 1.5 years before NRK published their story about how we change and destroy our nature, Beatrice started to look into what has happened with Norwegian landscapes the last 20, 30 years, to get a historical view on the changes that are going on. Where do we change? What is changed into what? And most importantly, what is the consequence? And she is here and will talk more about this today. So what you have seen, particularly if you have looked at the NRK stories, is something like this, a picture from above of nature. This only shows the skeleton of the nature. It shows the structure, but you cannot see species like this from a satellite or from an aerial photo. Sometimes you have to take the job to go into the nature to find out what is there, what values are there, and what is the consequence of doing something within that nature. And that may be time-consuming and a lot of effort, but we are so lucky that we have Francois, who will take that job and is willing to get his hands dirty to really try to understand more than what you can see from above, to see what is inside the nature. So back to my naive time as a student, I had so strong belief on this map as the perfect tool to get a better solution of the nature crisis. It didn't work. Then we got this wedding cake diagram that puts the biosphere, the nature in the bottom, and every other parts of the UN Sustainability Development Goals, all parts of the society and the economy, really rests on the nature. How more clear can it be that we need to take care of the nature? So we have this bottom up. We need to protect and take care of nature to get good societies and good economy. Still, it doesn't work. Then we have some other people that I not often talk to, which are economists. And they start to get worried. And you know that when the world-leading economists start to get worried about anything, then it's serious matter. And maybe a proper, good, well-functioning tools doesn't work from below and above. Maybe we have to think like this, from top and down, to have the good tools. I don't know. The only thing I know is that the tools we have had the last 30 years may not have been very successful. But I also know that we have a very good person, Natjar, that will look into these tools, what tools exist, how do they work, how are they used, and how are they perhaps misused, to help us learning a bit more about what is a good tool to start solving the biodiversity crisis and the loss of nature. So we are very lucky to have a university that really puts sustainability on the agenda and also allocate resources, because it's not enough with good words, nice words. But NTNU and myself are really, really lucky to have this bunch of young, talented, dedicated people that are willing to do the job to work towards NTNU's vision, knowledge for a better world. So I'm really proud to leave the stage now and let them do the rest of the job today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivar. This was a very good introduction. We are now going to meet Beatrice Trascau. She is from Romania. She is ecologist and biogeographer at the NTNU University Museum. She has completed her bachelor's and master's degrees in University of York in United Kingdom. In her PhD project, she investigates the patterns of land use changes that has occurred across Norway through time, and how these have shaped the biodiversity that we see today. She's particularly interested in understanding the differences in impact that different land use changes have on biodiversity, and whether these differ between groups of species such as plants, birds, insects, and mammals. Beatrice, please.
Thank you very much, Wenche, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. Tonight, I'll be talking to you about how 20 years of land cover changes have shaped Norway's biodiversity. Most often, when we think about the impact of land cover changes on biodiversity, we tend to think about it from a similar framework like in this show. For those of you who are unfamiliar, in this animated series, this group of animals is dealing with the fact that their forest is being cut down to become a suburban living area. This is what we would call a ground-level perspective. However, the reality is that the land across Norway is changing everywhere, from local to regional and national levels, most often simultaneously, and in ways that may be harder to delimit than we would like to imagine. And also, we currently do not have a good understanding of where the changes are happening, how much of the land is changing, and the exact ways in which it is changing. So when it comes to assessing how land cover impacts biodiversity, it is often difficult to untangle this difficult question when we're only using a ground-level perspective. But as we've seen from NRK's recent article about the loss of nature in Norway, some newer methods are available to us. And luckily for us, the Earth is under the watchful eye of thousands of satellites. And one of these satellites is the European Union's Sentinel-2, which collects information about floods, fires, glaciers, etc. But most importantly, for our presentation tonight and for my PhD, it also collects information about the type of land cover across the entirety of Europe for every 100 meter by 100 meter square of land. Both of the examples I've given you so far, which is the animated TV series and the NRK's article about loss of nature, detail a specific kind of land cover change, which is a transition from some form of forest cover to some urban cover, be it a suburban living area or infrastructure or industry. But one of the main messages I would like you to leave with tonight is that land cover changes are much more than that. They're much more diverse, and there are many more types than just that. And also the way that they impact biodiversity depends largely on the type of change. So let's look at some of the changes that Sentinel-2 has detected across the entirety of Norway for the past 20-ish years. The most prominent type of change that we see is that of forests to something we call transitional woodland shrub, and vice versa. So this type of change is actually consistent with the type of clear-cut logging that's practiced by the forestry industry in Norway. What we're also seeing is that forests are being converted to agricultural land, they are converted to grasslands, and of course also urban areas. But also agricultural lands are transformed into urban areas, grasslands are abandoned and therefore become overgrown, and the type of agriculture that is practiced on the land intensifies. So we are going from a piece of land that is used for some form of low-intensity agriculture to it being used for some more highly intensive agriculture. So you may ask yourself, do we already have any knowledge of what happens to the biodiversity when the land is changing in such ways? And the answer is yes, but these studies have been done at more local, smaller scales. Nevertheless, let's look at some of the previous results. Again, we're going to go back to this picture from the NRK article where we see this very dramatic change in the land on this island. And remember when I said that Sentinel-2 collects data for every 100 meter by 100 meter square of land across Europe. This is what that would look like if we imposed it over this island. And let's imagine that in one of these cells, we have a set of species. So, over time, these set of species, the land that they inhabit undergoes some type of change. And what we see initially is that new species come and colonize this newly disturbed land. So initially, this looks great. We're getting more species. It's more biodiversity, right? But over time, what happens is that these new species tend to be better predators, better competitors, and over time, they lead to the extinction of some of the original species. So whilst on a shorter time scale, it looked great that we have more biodiversity, over longer periods of time, we are actually losing species, and oftentimes more species than the ones gained from the land changing. But what about if we look at two cells that are neighboring one another, and they each have their unique set of species? Again, the land is changing in one way or another. Again, new species colonize this disturbed land. And again, they are better competitors and predators, so they lead to the extinction of some of the original species. What we see now is that not only have we lost species from each of the individual cells, but they are also much more similar to one another than they were in the beginning, which means that we've lost some regional diversity. So how do we test these previous findings at a national scale to see what's happening across all Norway? Well, luckily for us, universities, museums, government agencies, and also citizen scientists, just to name a few, are all monitoring biodiversity. And they are all making their data available through something we call the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is currently hosting about 50 million records for the entirety of Norway. This means that in my PhD, I can use these 50 million records that are available through GBIF alongside the data collected by the satellites to assess some of these previous findings for the entirety of Norway over longer timescales. So what we think is happening is that the impact that land cover changes has on biodiversity largely depends on the timescale we are considering, the type of land cover change, and also the group of species that we're looking at. But there are also other questions that are important to address. For example, what happens when we consider alien species? Like this slug that, if you remember, I used earlier as an example of the species that colonizes a land after it's changed. And this is because this species is actually invasive in Norway. But are alien species likely to be favored by land cover changes? Will they come to dominate a land that has changed in some form or another? And what happens to the way that biodiversity responds to land cover changes when we factor in climate change? Will climate and land cover changes work together to drive even more species loss across the entirety of Norway? Could we maybe use land cover changes as a buffer against the negative impacts of climate change? These are, of course, all questions that I am planning to answer in my PhD. Thank you.
We wish you very good luck, Beatrice. And I feel that many here understand how huge these challenges is to map down, to understand, to analyze. We are going on. François Lazarus took his higher education in France with a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's degree in biodiversity, ecology and evolution. During his education, he has participated in research projects in Finland and in Norway, including Spitsbergen. His PhD project, he focuses on the spatial characteristics that help maintain biodiversity across typical nature types of Trøndelag. This requires the use of large datasets on species presence and abundance and can help us understand the fundamental question of why species are where they are and why they are absent where they are not. The final aim is to improve our understanding of how biodiversity will respond to land use changes and loss of nature. Please, François.
Thank you, Randy, and good evening, everyone. So, I want to bring you into a deeper dive even in the biodiversity theme of tonight, NTNU Kveld. And I want to talk about how the study of biodiversity fluctuation in space and in time may help us find sustainable solutions for land use changes. But first, I want to take a step back, and I want to talk about us, people. Each of us have preferences. While some of us might like the warmth and the rain, some others might prefer the sun and the cold. We have thousands of preferences like this, and they may impact where we live or where we want to go on holiday, right? For plants and animals, it is roughly the same thing. They have tons of preferences. They might agree on some of them, they might disagree on some others. But to our eyes, a large part of what they like is hard to know. We don't grasp everything. Same thing for the things that they dislike. A large part of what they dislike is still unknown to us. These preferences and dislikes, of course, might affect where we will find these species out in the nature. But now, let's imagine that I give you a home, and this home has everything of what you like and nothing of what you don't like. But it's slightly too small. Maybe you will try to stay and live in there for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but eventually you will leave. You'll pack your things and leave. For plants and animals, it is the same thing. If the piece of nature that they want to live in is too small, you will not find them there. Okay, but let's make this home big enough. But this time I put it in the middle of a highway. Once again, you might try to live in there for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, but eventually you will leave. For animals and plants, again, it's the same thing. Even if their home is big enough, if the surroundings of their home is not good enough to them, they will not be found there. And now you might think, okay, but this is a bit ridiculous, right? But if you were a bird, would you want to live in that tree in the middle of the road? I doubt it. Okay, so we now understand a little bit what makes species live or not at a certain place. But I hinted it already, that we don't really see very well what makes it that they're there or not. For example, in these 3 different forests, and I swear these are different forests, where we go out and collect data for this project. To us, when we go there, they look very similar. But the set of species that we collect is different each time. Same thing here, 3 different wetlands, I swear. And for each of these, we have a different set of species. Which brings me to a central question, both in the ecology field and a central question for my work, which has been spoiled to you already, which is why are species where they are, and conversely, why are they absent where they are not? This is the main question that I'm going to try to answer during this PhD. And to answer this, I'm facing a lot of challenges. The first one is that I need to take my little legs all around Trøndelag and collect data. So this is me in last summer on a rainy day, collecting data, or finishing collecting data. And we need a lot of this data. So what am I actually referring to now when I'm saying data? These specific traps that you see on each pictures collect insects. They collect a lot of them. They actually collect so many of them that we have to select the lucky ones for the studies. Those flies then, what we're really interested in is to understand their identities. What is the species connected to each of these individuals? And thanks to the latest DNA analysis, we can get that. We actually get the identity of each of these individuals. So we end up with a mass of data, a lot of it. And we are able to deal with this data only because the computers are now powerful enough. And also because there have been really smart people developing the statistical tools to be able to deal with that. So when I say statistical tool, I'm referring to a model. And you can imagine the model as a pot. And I will put some ingredients in this pot. It will work, give me something back, and this something I can work with it again. What I put in this pot is first the species identity. So each identity of the individuals that we collect. It goes in. Then I also put in where and when we have found each of these individuals. And on top of this, I also put what are like a bunch of environmental variables, like temperature, precipitation, the type of vegetation that we find where we have found those species. And with the output of this model, we can do some very exciting things. The first thing is, because the model reveals the preferences and the dislikes of the species that we collect, we can better predict where they will be in the landscape. And this can also lead to a substantial gain of time when we want to monitor biodiversity. The second thing that we can do is, because the model can reveal the space requirements and how the surroundings of the home size affect this size, the space requirements, we're able to identify sustainable amounts of nature that will maintain high levels of biodiversity. And lastly, back to our bergkåk example, The model, because it reveals the preferences, the dislikes, the space and surrounding requirements for the species, we're able to predict the impacts of land use changes on the remaining nature. So if you have the idea to pass Berkåk very quickly and destroy a bunch of nature in the process, the model is supposedly able to tell us how this will affect the biodiversity, even in the areas we don't destroy. So I hope that I made it a bit clearer for you what I do, firstly, but also how what I do can help us find sustainable solutions for land use changes. Thank you.
I think we also need to wish you good luck in the fields of the Trøndelag nature. The last PhD candidate is Natyar Balasubramanian. She comes from India, and she did her bachelor's in zoology in India and master's in ecosystem services in Germany. In her PhD, she tries to identify tools for companies and municipalities to measure and to mitigate their impacts on biodiversity. It is fundamental to understand the changing requirements for reporting on biodiversity and sustainability at EU level, so they can be applied in Norwegian industrial sectors. The project also collaborates with Trondheim municipality to implement the concept of area neutrality and what it means for biodiversity and nature conservation. Natyar is doing her PhD at the Department of Industrial Economics and Technology Management at NTNU. So please, Natyar, the stage is yours.
Show of hands, how many of you have seen this NRK article or read it? Okay. What about this series? Great. Okay. So probably that's why you're here, right? They were. But also, I must say, this is a very good background for my PhD, so that I'm not boring you as to why I'm here. So the main message is we are building down nature. And why is it going unnoticed? Why is it going unnoticed, and what can we do about it? And also, who's ready to take responsibility for it? So I am Natyar, and I'm here to talk about the loss of biodiversity in Norway, surprise, surprise, but also to look at the role companies and municipalities play in this nature crisis discussion. So I started my PhD a year and a half ago. So last year, there was this article on NRK. And in this article, they were looking at the forestry sector. And they were talking about how the most revered green sector in all of Norway, or even in Europe, might not be the greenest, as you think. So we were curious, and we were like, okay, let's look at the sector. Because we work with companies, we decided to look at the actors in the forestry sector and took a small sample size in Norway. But also, why did we decide to do this? Because it is a legal requirement for these companies to report on how they're impacting biodiversity. This goes back to the Accounting Act, the Regnskapsloven. So this act has been implemented from 1999, and now it has been updated in 2023. And what does this act say? It is a bunch of reporting requirements for companies based on their size and financial situation. So they have to report on their financial and other status. One of the paragraphs that's important for my research is this one. You don't have to read it, I'm just going to say what it is. So this says the companies have to report on their impact on the external environment that they're going to cause from their activities, but also they have to state the measures that they plan to implement or have implemented to avoid the negative impact on biodiversity and external environment. So we decided to test it, like I said, and took a small sample size in Trøndelag. So we mapped the forestry actors. Don't hate me for the plantation forest word. It is plantation forest somehow, or cultivated forest, if you may want. And we divided them into the logging sector, sawmills, construction industry, bioenergy, and the paper industry. And we were looking at the ytre miljø section in all of their annual reports. We looked at about 350 companies and their reports. And shockingly, we found only 7% of them had even the section of ytre miljø in it. So it's a legal requirement, but it is not being implemented. Then you might ask, why am I here talking about it when this law has been there since 1999, right? Because we've been hearing about it quite a lot in the news. There's a green transition going on in the EU level in terms of new directives for the financial sector, but also new regulations for companies on how they report on their practices. And they are all based on EU taxonomy, another buzzword. What is EU taxonomy? So EU taxonomy is an objective which has 6 environmental objectives. So what are they? They are with climate, sustainable water use, pollution, circular economy, and the last one that's important for my work as well is protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So the good thing about EU taxonomy is that the companies have to report on all of these 6 objectives. They can prove that they're doing significant positive impact on one of them, but they also have to prove that they don't negatively affect the other 5. So we've come a long way in terms of like maybe pollution or climate, but we haven't done so much. My research clearly shows that we haven't gone so far in like the biodiversity part. So now is the time for like the companies to start hustling. And a lot of you might be thinking, why am I talking this policy from EU? Why is it important for Norway? It is important for Norway because Norway has to do trade with other parts of the world. And the NOU on sustainability reporting was released last year, and they also wrote another NOU with nature risk for the industrial sector and society earlier this year. And we've been told that there's going to be another white paper on the reporting as well. So it is going to be implemented as a law again, and the companies have to follow it. So now might be the time for them to hustle. Okay, so now I've talked to all the boring stuff about laws. Maybe I talk a good example from the municipalities. So another buzzword, I like buzzwords, I think, area neutrality. So in Norway, a couple of municipalities have implemented, if not talked about being area neutral. So there was another news article with Sabima being the background where they talked about 80 municipalities trying to be area neutral. So if some people are saying they're going to be area neutral, we decided to see what it means and how it's implemented. So we didn't go very far. Just used Trondheim as a case study example, because Trondheim is one of the pioneers in implementing area neutrality. So it is one of the objectives in the new KPA, which is yet to be passed by the City Council. So in the small map, you can see how they have a detailed structure of how much area they have and how they're going to build, but also not to go into the details of it. If you look at the bigger map, you can see that they are planning to only construct or build in the green, in the gray zone, leave the red and the green area somewhat untouched, and don't build down nature, which is a very good thing, I think. And it is also in line with what the residents of Trøndelag want. So this was a Trøndelag-wide survey, and they were asking a bunch of questions about sustainability. And when they asked people how much are they willing to cut down nature for infrastructure, Trondheim was one of the areas where they said least 13%. But also this clearly shows the most urbanized citizens don't want nature to be cut down, and then less urbanized areas are still halfway there. So the area neutrality concept might be a very good, positive example in the right direction. But I would like to leave you maybe with one question. So this is one municipality in all of Norway, which is committed to be area neutral and are implementing plans as to how they're going to do this. Let's say, for instance, a company is coming to Trøndelag and they're like, oh, we need space to build our infrastructure. And then Trøndelag says, oh, we don't have space. We can't do it. And then they could simply just go to Orkland or Malvik, our neighboring municipalities, and they might say yes, because they haven't committed to be area neutral. And they could end up building down more valuable nature than in Trondheim. So this kind of points out that there's a need for like a national wild regulation where you can balance out how much you're able to cut down and preserve nature so that it stops being built down in pieces and goes unnoticed. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Natjar. Then we have heard all the lectures that we were having before an intermission, which will be about 10 minutes. So please take your 10 minutes and we will meet again and with the panel. Velkommen tilbake til alle i salen og på sted. Welcome back, everyone in the hall and everyone in the stream. Now we continue with some questions. There will also, of course, be people with a microphone in the hall, and just give your sign, and people will come, and you can also give the questions. We start a little bit with the panel. Thank you for the presentations and all the work that you have done through these 3 months of coaching and working for presenting at this stage here. And I would like to start with the last of you, Natjar. You talked about Trondheim kommune, and that is a size that we can all relate to our municipality. And I think it's also probably relevant for comparison with a lot of smaller cities in Norway and other places as well. And I noticed that you used the word areal neutrality, neutral. Could you explain that so we are aware of exactly what does that mean?
That's a very interesting question, because my research is on just understanding what that word means, because because it has not been defined anywhere, so every municipality has their own interpretation of it, and they try to implement it based on their own interpretation and definitions, basically. So, yeah. I wish I could have a definition, but I don't.
But this answer is very interesting.
Yes.
There is no standardization of what means with the areal neutrality,
Yeah.
but it has something to do. If you destroy something, you have to restore something, or it's a balance between the two.
Yeah, maybe I can talk about Trondheim. In Trondheim, that's what they're trying to do in terms of like land budgeting or accounting, at least. So if they're going to take out some parts of nature, they have to restore it somewhere, or give another location as a protected area, or LNFR, for instance. So it's basically having a break-even point, and maybe in international standards it's like similar to the no net loss concept for the other scientists in the room who know about it. So it's just to make sure you're not cutting down more nature than what has already been cut down so far.
But does that mean that it's also almost impossible to measure whether areal neutrality is taken care of?
The Trondheim commune has made it possible that they are able to measure it. So there's this much square kilometers or acres of land, and then how much have we cut down, how much have we built, and then how much are we going to restore. So they do it that way.
Okay.
Yes.
But here is a landscape in all the municipalities in Norway and Scandinavia and so on. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
We understand we need many PhDs here. And secondly, a question for more of you, and you also used the word responsibility. Where, Ivar, you also drew up the how to get quickest possible through Berkåk. That is maybe the main cause for making the E6 new in the nature. Where is the responsibility placed? Where is it? yeah, Ivar, you can start.
Yeah, that's also a very interesting question, because if you go back to Trondheim, they can decide to be area neutral or nature neutral as much as they want. But if the state decides that we want a new E6 to get to Værnes, how can Trondheim manage to compensate that nature loss? So there are very different levels here of responsibilities, and they operate at different scales. So for instance, the wind power plant, it's on a high level, big scales, but then you have all these smaller changes that are much more difficult to detect and observe and describe, that maybe are made at the municipality or even at the final level by landowners. And so how to place the responsibility? What I think is that what we lack is so now I talk not behalf of myself as an ecologist, more like a engaged person that have my strong opinions. So what I feel we lack is a let's say a minister or a state organ that oversees all other ministers or sectors when it comes to nature and environment. Because the problem, I think, is that we have these sectors that don't talk to each other, and that sort of lacks the overview. And I think the idea with the Climate and Environment Ministry was at some point to be that minister. They were responsible for the area, the land use management of Norway. That is now put to other ministers, but so it doesn't work that way today. So
it's rather hard to even for the authorities, to state authorities, to organize the responsibility at one place or one level.
Yeah, I should be a bit careful, but because maybe there are some people here that represent that level. But it seems, at least to me, that there are quite a lot of decisions about nature that are made without the environmental agencies or ministries having so much to say. That's my personal observation.
Several others' observations as well. Okay, Beatrice and Francois, you are the two, at least now for this presentation, referring to a huge bunch of data. You are collecting data with the technology, with all the resources and the resources that you create. What are the biggest challenge, Beatrice, seen from your perspective? Which are the really crucial challenge that you have to reach through with your message and your knowledge?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to jump a bit back off the last question about responsibility. And I think whilst I fully agree with everything that Ivar has said, I think we shouldn't forget about our own personal responsibility. And that is to vote for people who have nature in mind, and to understand that with great in Norway is very lucky to be a country with many resources, where most people at least have a very good life. So we need to make sure that that continues to be the case for everyone, and that the future will be the same. Or even better for those we leave this planet to. And then to go back to to your question about data, the challenges are numerous and they're diverse. I think when it comes to decision making, the main challenge is that data is misused. I talked a lot about this, all those 50 million, or about 50 million records about that are available for the entirety of Norway. And whilst they are great, there are many different things we need to consider when we're using them. I could go into heavy detail about what kind of data we need more of, what kind of biases we are facing. But from my point of view, sometimes the data that we have is greater in quantity than it is in quality. Sometimes, whilst in my example, everyone made their data available for people like me to use, unfortunately, there are still some other actors that collect data about biodiversity who are not making it available to everyone. So, yeah.
But the misuse of data is
yes,
a
the
challenge.
misuse of data is a big issue because, you know, from that, if we think back to that map of mine with the 50 million records, you know, some agencies or when decisions are made, they may look at a map and say, well, according to these records, there's no species on this tiny island, so we can completely build here. We can drastically change the landscape, and it's fine because there's no species there. But just because we don't have records of the species being there, that is a very different different idea than the species not being there at all. So we need more data, we need more quality data, and we need more data from the areas where we don't have data, of course. Yeah.
François, maybe you also will to touch the responsibility before you go on.
I think most of it has been said.
Please.
And I agree with what has been said about that topic. About the data, my data is different because for the most part, or at least the biodiversity part, I collect it myself. Or scientists are collecting it. I'm only using the public data for instance, the environmental data sets. So when we want to look at temperature and precipitations, these are open data for the most part. The challenge with my data lies in how we get it. There are also biases with these traps. They're not perfect, but nothing is. So we have to deal with the flaws that are inherent to how we collect the data. And I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but maybe I could give you one example of it, which is if you have a species that is extremely rare out there in the forest, imagine you only have, say, 4 of those in the whole forest, you have almost no chance of catching them in the trap. And so you would completely miss them in your analyses. So this is one example. Another one is that by chance you catch the 4 of them, and then you think they're not that rare. So you really need to be careful how you interpret the results that you get.
Yes, and now why did I ask? Because we have everyone heard of fake news, but we also have something that is fake research, and a lot of people saying that the true research also is fake research. So how the challenge of being having the credibility and the confidence and to make authorities and people in the countries to agree upon what is true, because that is also maybe a case to define what is true and what is false. Is that something you're thinking about?
I think that's a great question for a social scientist, maybe.
Yeah.
What I can say is that personally, when it comes to the credibility of my research and any research, it is a question that I'm very mindful of. And from our side, well, I can speak for myself, but I know for a fact that everyone is doing this. What we can do is to make everything, make everything transparent. And I think something that we as scientists are very comfortable with, but maybe the public isn't, is saying I don't know and being transparent about that. And that's all we can do, pretty much.
That's your contribution. More comments? Yeah, please, Chair.
Yes, I completely agree with Beatrice about the transparency part, but also from my research, at least, it's also about what people, the opinions of people also matter. For instance, I come from India, and nature means a different thing to me. Forest means a different thing to me. Forest is jungle. Forest is not the forest here. But it's also what people see and perceive. It changes from place to place, and that also adds to the credibility and what they want to believe and what they don't want to believe. So it's not a straightforward thing as to say that, oh, scientists have found this and this is how it has to be done. That might not be the case in a lot of places. So we need to be mindful of that as well in decision making and in policy.
Especially on the global perspective. Ivar?
Yeah, I want to catch up with the openness again, because so we have had a lot of conflicts around different building of windmills or E6 or whatever, and much of that conflict is about disagreement of the fact. What will happen? What is there of biodiversity? And so I think that we need better knowledge that will reduce the conflict, and we can then, instead of discussing what is the consequence, what will we lose, we can discuss what are we willing to accept to lose. And that's a different type of discussion, which I think is more fruitful. But then we need, of course, more research, good for me, but we need open research. We need that those data that are collected by different institutions or companies when doing these surveys and monitoring are shared and open so everyone can see each other cards and not argue about the facts, but more about what are we willing to accept.
As consequences. Okay, thank you so far. Can we have a little bit more light in the hall, maybe? Now I would like to have some questions from the audience. Is there anyone that would like to ask this scientist about anything? Everyone understands everything.
Thanks to all of you. It's been really interesting to listen to what you've been saying. I'm going to try to be a little bit proactive.
Yeah, make a question short, please.
Yep. So, if we do as a premise that untouched nature is something good, would you agree that urbanization is the solution to it, to make people move away from the rural areas and into the cities?
Who will answer?
I can answer that, because it's both a simple and a complex answer. But the first goes into what do you mean by nature, and we don't have time to discuss that. Let's agree with that. But there is a lot of threatened nature that is dependent on humans. We have all this cultural landscape, the semi-natural grassland, the coastal landscape that without humans would transform into something else. And maybe it will transform into something that it looks like 10,000 years ago. But still, these nature types are rich on biodiversity. So with that respect, I think that we need humans also in the nature. So, and then I think we also should think about nature as, I mean, we have been a part of nature for 10,000 years in Norway, or about that. I'm not sure exactly the date when we entered, but in one way or another, we have coexisted with nature in good and bad ways. And I think don't think the solution is to separate us from nature, because I think we need a connection to nature to understand the importance of it. And I will stop there.
Will you comment on the question, or we could go further? Yeah.
I have
Please.
one interesting comment that Ivar mentioned about coexistence. It's not a word that you hear so much nowadays, because we as humans have decided to put ourselves on top of the pyramid and then isolate ourselves from nature per se, whatever nature means for us. So putting us back in the mix with nature and humans together and seeing the relationship between the two, which has been researched for decades now, and trying to coexist is the way forward, not just leaving nature aside and moving all humans to one part. We can't live sustainable like that. So it's very important that we are living together with nature.
Okay, yeah. François, you want to comment, or? Yeah? No? You live in nature a lot, yeah. More questions or comments? Yeah, there we have a hand.
Thank you for very interesting talks. I was wondering about the area neutrality, which is taking place in Trondheim, and I'm sort of, where is it? Do you have specific examples? What are we doing? That's good.
Yeah, please, Naturen.
I'm a very sarcastic person, so I'm going to say I'm searching for it as well. To point out the good examples might be, or what is stated is the LNFR areas that Trondheim municipality has set aside. So they have marked a lot of the green areas, if you remember the map that I showed, to make sure we're not building down nature there, and still restricting the urbanization in the Merrill strip around the river for Trondheim, for instance, at least. So that is the initial step for area neutrality in Trondheim example. Yes.
But I follow up a little bit. Do we have a concrete example of really restoration of destroyed nature in Trondheim municipality area? Do we have a good example that we can go and see?
I'm forgetting the name of the place, close to Ile, where there was a company built. Now they have restored the stream there, and it is looking beautiful.
Yeah, cleaned up the area.
Yes, and restored it, per se. Okay. If you look at area neutrality, that's one of the examples that you see. Even in the article that I showed you, it's put up there. Yes.
So there are examples.
There are.
Yeah. For continuing, like you asking for concrete examples, we understand after listening to your presentations that the loss of biodiversity and species, it's a serious and deeply serious and deeply process going on, which will destroy much more than nature. But can you, from your perspectives, give more concrete examples? Why? I mean, we see it's green outside. Many people see we have a lot of nature in Norway. What I was screaming about when in the airplane, I can see the nature all over. So I know many people. Is this so important? Why is it important? What can be the consequences if we don't pay attention to this from for example, your perspective, Francois?
Yeah. So, if you've listened to my presentation, you know that it's actually hard to perceive what we lose because it's hard to understand why a species disappears from a local area if we don't know its preferences and its dislikes. So it might well be that we altered something, we are not even aware of it, and it makes the species disappear. It's also those species that disappear without us noticing might also play very important roles in the big picture in the ecosystem. So, say if you lost the diversity in the soil, there are tiny insects and arthropods. You never see them actually. Even if you take the soil and look at it in your hand, you would not see the diversity there. Yet if you lose this, you lose all of the what we call ecosystem services that are associated with them. So that is that they make the soil fertile. And this we care of, right? So, yeah, even those very cryptic species, very invisible diversity play a role in the big picture.
And invisible consequences as well that have a great impact.
The consequences are then very visible. Because if we don't have fertile soils, we will very quickly realize that we can't yield any food. If the trees purify the air and the water, which they do, if we lose diversity there, we might also lose their purification, or what they do, which is purifying the air and the water. And then we would again notice it very quickly, because we would spend more money purifying it ourselves, which we wouldn't really like, I think, but also because we would have to palliate this.
Yeah? More of you want to comment?
Just to add on Francois' example of ecosystem services, right? There has been the IPES, which is an international panel for biodiversity and ecosystem services, where they have been monetizing the value of nature. I mean, we can go into a debate on monetizing nature, but it is still good, because one of the research showed about how many trillions of dollars we would need if we lost all the bees. For instance, we would not have food production, and how it'll be hard for us to replace it, and how much money we have to invest in it. So it would not take us like decades before we learn the consequences of us cutting down nature. It'll be in our own lifetime. So that is why we need to stop it going unnoticed and start making measurements to prevent it from happening.
Beatrice?
And I think something that we need to remember is also that these losses and changes that we're seeing now, they haven't just started happening today or yesterday or even 20 years ago. They've been happening forever. And what we see now is the product of hundreds of years of changes. And the biodiversity we see today is not, even in the most remote places, it is not untouched by human influence. So when we're talking about loss and loss of species and loss of ecosystem services, we have already this has already happened, and unfortunately we don't know how much. There is a lot of species that are not identified, and we lose these species before we get to name them, or before they get to be taxonomically identified. And that is something that I think we need to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about biodiversity crisis. Part of what makes this crisis so threatening is the fact that, well, first of all, let's define biodiversity. And we don't know how many species we have. We have estimates, of course, but there are still many we haven't discovered yet. And that, yeah, we are losing before they are discovered.
Even in the Norwegian nature, not only in the regnskog in Latin America.
Just so we sample insects, and in our project, I think we have discovered a new species in Norway, isn't it? This new species of beetle. Or we think we have, right? In the world, yeah, a whole new species. So it's happening even
in Trøndelag.
In Trøndelag.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I want to point out that so maybe we have more nature than the Netherlands and France and these countries that we, at least when it comes to sports, we want to compare us against. but the point is that we don't know where is the limit. At what point have we lost so much that it really goes down with both nature and us? So we often talk about tipping points. We don't know where we are. If any, at some point we go into something irreversible. And then we need to keep in mind this principle of precaution that is also stated in the Norwegian Biodiversity Act, Naturmangfoldloven. If we don't know anything, that shouldn't stop us from doing actions to improve. The lack of knowledge isn't a reason for not acting. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that we don't know when we have passed the limit.
Until it's too late. And you bring me further to my next question, and it's what can we do? I mean, we can talk about ourselves. You mentioned bees. We could start with a bee cube and do something, change the plants in our garden and at that level. And you also mentioned the national regulations and even the EU regulations. There are many levels, many etages in this building of decision making. But for example, individual. If all of us, if we should do something tomorrow, what would be have some impact, some effect? Is there anything we can do except you said voting? Is that the best we can do, to vote?
Not tomorrow, but. No, I think it goes a bit back to all these sustainability questions, that you have to do these small things every day. Maybe not take the car if you don't have to.
Small things?
Well, it's for instance how you travel, how much you use. Do you have to buy new clothes? Because very much of the land use change is related to consumption, and we are consuming more at a higher rate than ever. So if we can reduce the consumption, I think we also will reduce the consumption for nature. Just look at energy. All these data centers that are being built for us to store our pictures on the phone or on TikTok or whatever, it's consumption. They need both energy and they need space, and the energy also needs space. So energy production needs space. So I think it goes back to our daily, maybe spend 5 minutes deleting 100 pictures from your phone or something like that. I mean, it's not only to think about what can I do for nature, but what can I do for reducing consumption and living a bit simpler life maybe, or less costly.
There are still things you can do for nature that I think everyone who has a garden could really easily set up. But it's also, to build up on that, it touches our values, I think. why do we want a green lawn with one species of grass that is this tall exactly? Why is it? I think it's important to ask ourselves, is it to show off to the neighbor? Is it, why would it hurt to have more diversity in your own lawn? When I first came here, I was a bit shocked actually, because in Norway you have those perfect lawns. And in France we do have some weird people having them. But overall it's much more
wild lawns.
wild. I wouldn't say wild, but say less heavily managed. And you have still people who have tall grass in their gardens, and they just cut out the round spot in the middle to have their dinners or lunch there. I think it's also different values that we hold, and Tonje could talk more about this, I guess, but what do we think is pretty and what we think is valuable and nice?
Yeah, you get associations. Yeah, please.
I'm going back to my presentation because I talked about who do we hold responsible, or who's ready to take the responsibility. It's not just the top-down, like Ivar mentioned in the wedding cake model. It's also bottom-up. My supervisor always likes to tell this joke when electric cars were introduced in Norway. People who used to walk from their house to the supermarket started taking the cars because they thought they're being sustainable by driving an electric car. So that is again still consumption, right? So it's the understanding the nuances of being sustainable and what it means for individuals, what it means for the planet, what it means for the country per se, and figuring out your own role and responsibility in it, I think. Yeah.
I would also like to go back to my presentation, and I guess maybe it's not such a direct impact, but I've mentioned earlier that there is a lot of data we still don't have, and there are a lot of places that are not monitored, and we do not understand the biodiversity there. So I think that something people can do for nature is actually get involved with monitoring nature. So there are many citizen science programs for those of you who are not scientists yourselves, where there's monitoring schemes where people get together and they collect data, and because they are schemes that are put in place, this means that there is also some level of quality control for those. So
We can contribute.
yes, you can contribute directly to my PhD. But also to everyone else who is using the data, and those who are making decisions about whether to build in a place and are seeing an empty space on the, let's say, a map with where the species are, and they see an empty space and they think that means there's no species there, when in reality we just haven't looked there. So you would be contributing to putting some species on a map. Yeah.
Very good. Now I see a few hands here. One here and one in the front.
Which apps are we talking about? To this contribution?
There is iNaturalist, there's eBird, there are options. I think there are also more, there are some other participatory schemes that are not necessarily through an app. Yeah.
Please here. Is there a microphone around?
We're running.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, I had Artsdatabankens logo on my presentation, and Artsdatabanken, I don't know if many of you know, maybe no, but there is an app to help you identify the species. So maybe even if you don't recognize, yes?
Artsdatabanken.
Yes. So maybe if you have, let's say, a find plant in your garden and you don't know what it is, the app may be able to help you. So I highly encourage you to check it out, and maybe this will help you. Maybe actually helping nature starts with understanding the nature that is in your back garden.
Please,
First of all, thanks very much for nice presentations, and it's wonderful to sit and listen to the dialogue. Of course, it's a balance between top-down and bottom-up, let's say, things we could do. You are doing your research in a quite well-defined area, in a broad context, right? Today, the EU Parliament voted and decided upon the new, maybe it will become a law, or not just a policy, that within 2030, 30% of nature that is destroyed should be restored. And by 2050, 90%. In Norway, we are discussing quite heavily whether or not the plan of bygningslov, which is the community responsibility of each municipality, maybe should have more central responsibility. But politicians are against that. So my question to you 3 PhD students would be, even though you work on a more well-defined area within the broader context, do you think it's realistic to set goals of 30% in 7 years, in 6 years, and 90% towards 2050? And even though you might be optimists, if this is realistic, what would be the most important thing to do, according to your reflections? And that was on nature restoration, but maybe it would be equal on prevention. Thank you.
That was a new NTNU Kveld. Please, Naturen.
If I can start, I think it's a very good law that's been passed in the EU level, because when it's commitment signed at the Montreal Agreement or things, it's not something that's held accountable for. And now it is going to be accountable. But just to answer your question, I would say it is still possible. Which is very surprising for me, because I don't think most of things are possible that they say. But I think it is because we are not starting today. It's not that it has become a law, and from today we'll start looking for places where you can do restoration. No, it has been done for so long, and it is then easy when it is being implemented as a law that you're going to start building on it. Yes, 30% is a huge target, for instance, for Norway, because there are still projects where they're scoping for areas to restore, per se. But we should not feel challenged by the target, I think. I think that the target should be something that's motivating us to work towards it. Maybe we fall short, but at least here we are held accountable for being short of it. And if we are able to achieve the 30%, which would be great, and then I'm pretty sure it should not be hard to get to the 90% later on.
Okay. Francois, please.
I almost want to answer this question with another question, which is, what do we mean by nature, which is what we're not going into, but also what is destroyed nature, I think, is also, these are two questions. They're the same coin, the two sides of the same coin. Is Sitka forest nature or not?
It used to be.
Well, if it's not nature, what is it then, right? But is it destroyed? And if it is destroyed, how do you restore it? You cut down the Sitka forest? It's, I think, part of how we will succeed or not depend on how we define nature and, for instance, degraded nature, and when is it restored as well. So if we put the bar very low, I think it's, well, easier, at least, than if we put the bar very high. But this is something that I think is going to be collectively decided, or at least at each EU country's level.
Yeah, I agree, and I would also say it's possible, with caveats that I will go into. But most importantly, I think that this is a very tight deadline for a huge amount of work, but the reality is that we don't even have this time. When it comes to the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, we should have acted yesterday, basically. I think it is a huge undertaking, and I think it is possible, but I also think it will require let's say, societal sacrifices in a way. And what I mean by that is that we are willing to put resources from other things into restoring nature and into achieving these targets. I don't think we can achieve these targets if we continue to just act the way we have until now. I think these ambitious targets and the way I would like to believe that part of the reason they've been set so high is to encourage some sort of societal transformation to be more mindful and more focused, I think. I think it's easy to get sidetracked when it comes to the climate and nature crises with all the other crises that are happening all around us. But we shouldn't forget that if we don't have a planet to live on, well, we won't have other crises to take care of.
Then I think, Beatrice, François, Natchiar, you said the punchline here for this program. And I'm sure I have a lot of people here agreeing with me that you really impressed us with your presentations, and not at least about your reflections now in this panel speech. So thank you so much, and we wish you the very best, and we want to contribute in their collection of data, and the best good luck with your work for the PhD. So thank you very much.